Woman delivers 20 babies in 1 hour. The delivery shocks everyone. How will this story turn out? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. Isabella Carter gripped the sides of her hospital bed, her body trembling as another contraction ripped through her. The delivery room was a flurry of motion. Doctors, nurses, and medical staff moving in perfect synchrony, preparing for what was undoubtedly one of the most historic births in medical history. Dr. Patel, the lead obstetrician, stood beside her, his voice calm but urgent. "Isabella, you need to breathe. We're about to start." Isabella let out a sharp breath, sweat pouring down her forehead. She had been preparing for this moment for months, but nothing could have braced her for what was about to happen. Her husband, Daniel, squeezed her hand, his knuckles white from gripping so tightly. "You've got this, Bella," he whispered. "You're the strongest woman I know." The room buzzed with tension. No one had ever seen a pregnancy like this. No one had ever imagined a human body could do what Isabella's was about to do. The pregnancy that shocked the world. Isabella's case had confounded doctors from the very beginning. At her first ultrasound, doctors had expected to see one baby, maybe twins. Instead, they had counted 6. Then, a month later, they counted 10. By the 6th month, they had lost count. Scans showed an unprecedented number of fetuses, something the medical world had never encountered. How was it possible? Some believed it was a genetic anomaly. Others whispered about a medical miracle. The media caught wind of her pregnancy, and soon Isabella's story was everywhere. Mother expected to give birth to record-breaking number of babies. How is this possible? Scientists are baffled. The pregnancy that defies science. But all the speculation, all the headlines, meant nothing compared to the reality Isabella was about to face. She was about to deliver history. The first baby arrives. A contraction hit hard, making Isabella arch her back as she let out a cry. Dr. Patel glanced at the monitor. The first baby was crowning. "Hey, Isabella," deep breath. "Push." She bore down, every muscle in her body screaming, her vision blurring. And then, the first cry filled the room. A baby boy. The room erupted into motion. The nurses whisked him away, swiftly cutting the cord and checking his vitals. "Baby 1 is out," an assistant called. "Heart rate stable, weight normal." A wave of relief washed over Isabella. 1 down. But 19 more to go. The impossible continues. There was no time to rest. Before Isabella could even catch her breath, another contraction tore through her. The second baby was already on its way. Dr. Patel's eyes widened. This is happening faster than we expected. Another push. Another cry. A baby girl joined her brother. Then, another. And another. The medical staff scrambled, delivering baby after baby in rapid succession. It was as though Isabella's body was working on autopilot, bringing each child into the world at an impossible speed. By the 12th baby, the delivery room was overwhelmed. Extra nurses had been called in. The NICU was running out of space. The entire hospital was now operating at full emergency capacity. No one had ever seen a birth like this before. The world watches in shock. Outside the hospital, news crews had gathered. Reporters waited anxiously, delivering live updates to millions of people glued to their screens. We're witnessing what could be the most extraordinary birth in history. Medical experts are calling this unprecedented. Can a human body truly sustain and deliver this many babies at once? Social media erupted. People debated. Scientists speculated. Some called it a miracle. Others called it impossible. But inside that delivery room, Isabella wasn't thinking about the world. She was thinking about surviving this. Because despite the excitement, despite the medical marvel unfolding, something was wrong. The first sign of danger. Isabella's breathing grew labored. Her heart pounded erratically. The monitor beside her beeped. Her vitals were dropping. Dr. Patel frowned as he checked the readings. "Her blood pressure is unstable," a nurse warned. Dr. Patel turned to Isabella, his voice calm but urgent. "Isabella, we need to move quickly. Your body is under extreme stress. We have 8 more babies to go." Daniel's face paled. "How much blood has she lost?" he asked. One of the nurses hesitated. "Too much." Daniel gripped Isabella's hand. "You're going to make it, Bella. You hear me?" But Isabella's eyes were fluttering. Her body was giving out. And there were still more babies left to be born. Cliffhanger. Dr. Patel turned to the nurses. "She's going into shock. Prepare for an emergency intervention, now." The room erupted into action, the medical team scrambling to save both the mother and her unborn children. And as Isabella's world faded into darkness, the last thing she heard was the sound of another baby crying. Would she survive this impossible birth? Isabella drifted in and out of consciousness, her body overwhelmed by the unimaginable strain of delivering so many babies in such a short time. The delivery room was a war zone, nurses rushing between incubators, doctors calling out stats, alarms beeping in rapid succession. Dr. Patel's voice cut through the noise. "She's hemorrhaging. We need a transfusion, now." A nurse ran to retrieve emergency blood units, but the amount of blood Isabella had lost was already critical. Daniel, still gripping her hand, felt his heart shatter. "Bella, stay with me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Stay with me, love." The final babies arrive, a race against time. Despite the emergency, the births weren't stopping. Baby 13, baby 14, baby 15. It was happening at an inhuman speed. One of the nurses shook her head in disbelief. "How is this even possible?" Dr. Patel didn't respond. He didn't have an answer. All he could do was focus on delivering the last few babies while another team fought to keep Isabella alive. 16. 17. Another contraction. 18. The NICU was overflowing. The hallways were lined with incubators. Every available nurse, doctor, and pediatric specialist had been called in to assist. By the time baby 19 entered the world, the hospital was in complete crisis mode. And then, the final baby arrived. 20. The impossible had just happened. But the celebration was cut short, because as soon as the final baby was delivered, Isabella's heart flatlined. The fight for Isabella's life. Daniel felt the color drain from his face. "Oh, no. Dr. Patel was already in motion. Code blue. Start compressions." A nurse jumped onto the bed, hands pressing against Isabella's chest. 1, 2, 3, 4. "Come on, Isabella, breathe." Daniel felt paralyzed as the love of his life lay lifeless beneath the bright hospital lights. A doctor grabbed the defibrillator. Clear. A shock jolted Isabella's body. Nothing. Again, clear. Another surge of electricity. Silence. The machines flatlined again. Tears welled in Daniel's eyes. "Bella, please." Then a faint beep. Then another. And another. Dr. Patel let out a breath of relief. "She's back." The entire room exhaled. Isabella had survived. Barely. The baby's condition, a medical miracle? While the doctors rushed Isabella into intensive care, another crisis was unfolding. 20 premature babies, some weighing less than 2 pounds, were fighting for survival. Dr. Whitmore, the lead neonatologist, examined the infants, his brow furrowed. "These babies should be in severe distress," he murmured. "But they're stable." One of the nurses shook her head. "That doesn't make sense. At least half of them should be struggling to breathe." And yet, they weren't. The babies were tiny, fragile, but their vitals were stronger than expected. It defied everything science knew about extreme multiple births. Daniel, standing near the incubators, felt an eerie realization settle over him. Something about Isabella's pregnancy, about these babies, wasn't normal. The world reacts. As the medical team worked around the clock, the world exploded with the news. Every major outlet covered it. "Unbelievable. Woman delivers 20 babies in 1 hour. A world first." Doctors stunned by medical miracle. How did she survive? 20 newborns, 1 mother, 0 logical explanations. Scientists, doctors, and geneticists scrambled to explain what had just happened. Social media erupted in debates. This isn't medically possible. How did she carry 20 full-term babies? Could this be a rare genetic anomaly? A new stage in human evolution? It's a miracle. Nothing else explains it, but while the world searched for answers, Daniel only cared about one thing: his wife and his children. And they weren't out of danger yet. Cliffhanger. A disturbing revelation. 3 days later, as Isabella lay recovering, Dr. Patel and Dr. Whitmore entered the room, their expressions grave. Daniel, sitting beside Isabella's bed, immediately felt uneasy. "What's wrong?" he asked. Dr. Patel hesitated, then spoke. "There's something you need to know about your babies?" Daniel's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Dr. Whitmore cleared his throat. "They're too different." Silence. Isabella's fingers tightened around Daniel's hand. "Different how?" she whispered. The doctors exchanged looks. And then, Dr. Patel said something that changed everything. "They're not aging normally." Daniel felt his entire body tense. He glanced at Isabella, whose face had turned pale. "What do you mean they're not aging normally?" Daniel asked, his voice firm. Dr. Patel exhaled slowly. "We've been monitoring them closely, as you know. With premature births, we expect certain developmental delays, weaker immune systems, and complications. But your babies, they're doing the opposite?" Isabella's grip on Daniel's hand tightened. "What are you saying?" Dr. Whitmore cleared his throat. "They're growing too fast." The room fell into stunned silence. Daniel shook his head. "That doesn't make sense." Dr. Whitmore motioned toward the incubators visible through the glass window. "2 of your babies have already reached the average size of a 2-month-old. And it's been only 3 days." Isabella struggled to sit up, her body still weak. "Are you saying they're aging at an accelerated rate?" Dr. Patel hesitated before nodding. "That's exactly what we're saying." Daniel stood abruptly. "No, that's impossible. Are you sure there wasn't a mistake with the initial weight measurements?" Dr. Whitmore's expression remained grave. "We've double-checked everything. We've run every test we can think of. The results are undeniable." Isabella swallowed hard. "What does this mean for them?" "We don't know," Dr. Patel admitted. "This is completely unprecedented. Their bodies are developing at an unnatural pace, but they appear healthy. We need to conduct further studies to determine if this will stabilize or..." He trailed off, unwilling to say what they were all thinking. If it would continue, if their children would keep aging faster than normal, if they had mere months or years before their bodies reached adulthood. Daniel turned away, his hands running through his hair. This wasn't supposed to happen. They were supposed to be safe. Isabella's voice shook. "Are they in pain?" Dr. Whitmore's face softened. "No. So far, they're behaving like normal newborns, just growing at an extraordinary rate. But we need to monitor them closely." Daniel's fists clenched. "So what do we do now?" Dr. Patel sighed. Days passed, and the hospital remained on high alert. Inside the neonatal ward, the 20 infants continued to grow at a rate that defied all logic. At just 1 week old, some of them looked nearly 3 months old. Their weight had doubled, their movements had become more coordinated, and their vital signs remained perfectly stable. Too stable, in fact. It was as if their bodies had skipped the usual struggles of infancy altogether. A mother's fear. Isabella sat in a wheelchair beside the incubators, staring at her children through the glass. She was recovering, but the weight of the unknown pressed against her chest like a stone. One of the nurses, a kind woman named Evelyn, stood beside her. "They're beautiful," she said softly. Isabella swallowed hard. "I should be happy. They're healthy, they're strong, but I'm terrified." Evelyn's voice was gentle. "I don't think anyone would blame you for that." Isabella turned, eyes glassy. "What if I don't have years with them? What if I only have months? What if I wake up one day, and they're not babies anymore?" Evelyn didn't have an answer. No one did. An unprecedented study. In a private meeting room, a team of top geneticists, pediatricians, and biologists had been assembled to study the case. Dr. Patel stood at the front, clicking through images on a large screen. As of this morning, all 20 infants are showing an accelerated aging process. At this rate, they could reach full childhood in a matter of months. One of the researchers, Dr. Grant, shook his head in disbelief. "This is unlike anything we've ever seen." Their cellular regeneration is functioning at an abnormally high speed, yet there are no signs of deterioration. If anything, their cells seem to be strengthening rather than breaking down. Dr. Whitmore leaned forward. Are you suggesting that this could be some sort of evolutionary anomaly? Dr. Patel hesitated. We don't know. But we do know that whatever is happening, it wasn't supposed to be possible. The government takes notice. As the world's curiosity grew, so did the attention from high-ranking officials. Daniel noticed it first, subtle changes around the hospital. Security had doubled. Unmarked black vehicles had started appearing outside. Strangers in suits roamed the hallways, speaking in hushed tones. It wasn't long before they knocked on his door. A tall man in a government-issued suit stepped inside, flanked by two others. He introduced himself as Agent Collins from the National Medical Research Agency. We're here to ensure the safety of your children, Collins said smoothly. Your family situation is of national interest? Daniel's jaw tightened. We don't need your help. Collins smiled, but there was no warmth in his eyes. Mr. Carter, you don't understand. What's happening with your children is bigger than you, bigger than this hospital. If their condition is truly unprecedented, then it's a matter of scientific and national concern. Daniel stood his ground. They're not experiments. They're babies. Collins kept his gaze steady. For now. The words sent a chill through Daniel's spine. It was clear, the government wasn't just here to watch. They wanted control. The escape plan. That night, Daniel sat by Isabella's bedside, his mind racing. They're going to take them, he whispered. Isabella, still weak, turned her head toward him. What? The government. I see it in their eyes. They don't care about our family. They care about what the babies mean. If we don't do something now, we'll wake up one day, and they'll be gone. Isabella felt a lump form in her throat. What can we do? Daniel leaned in closer. We get out of here. We take them and disappear. Isabella's breath hitched. Leave? But they need medical care. I know, he said, voice shaking. But if we stay, they'll take them from us. We have to go before it's too late. Isabella's mind spun with fear and uncertainty. She had survived the impossible birth, but now she faced an even greater challenge. Keeping her children safe from a world that wasn't ready for them, and from forces that would stop at nothing to claim them. At the same time, in a dark conference room elsewhere, Agent Collins spoke into a phone. They're planning something, he said. They won't cooperate much longer. A deep voice on the other end replied. Then we move to phase 2. Collins nodded. Understood. Time was running out. For everyone. Daniel moved quickly, his heart pounding as he pushed a supply cart through the dimly lit hospital hallway. Every step felt heavier, the weight of his decision pressing against his chest. There was no turning back. If they stayed, their children would become subjects of study, prisoners in a system that saw them as an anomaly rather than human beings. They had to leave. And they had to do it tonight. The plan in motion. Isabella sat upright in her hospital bed, cradling one of the infants, her mind racing. She was still weak, her body barely recovered from the impossible birth, but she had no choice. She would find the strength. She had to. Daniel returned, his face tense. I checked the exit points. The back delivery entrance is our best bet. Security's focused on the main lobby. If we move fast, we can make it. Isabella glanced at the incubators. 20 tiny, fragile miracles. They had no idea the danger that surrounded them. How do we carry all of them? She whispered. I have a plan, Daniel said, gripping her hands. We'll use transport bassinets and disguise them under medical sheets. The car is already waiting outside. But we have to move now. Isabella nodded, her fingers trembling. Let's do this. The escape begins. Daniel and Isabella worked quickly, moving from one incubator to the next, carefully placing their children into transport bassinets. Nurse Evelyn entered just as they were finishing. Her eyes widened in understanding. You're leaving? Daniel swallowed hard. We don't have a choice. Evelyn nodded. I never saw anything. She stepped forward, helping arrange the bassinets. Go. Quickly. Daniel whispered a thank you as he pushed the first set of bassinets out into the hallway. Isabella, weak but determined, followed behind with the second. The hospital was eerily silent. They moved swiftly, keeping their heads down, blending into the routine of night staff. One hallway, then another. They reached the emergency stairwell, just a few feet from the back exit. And then, the alarm sounded. Daniel's blood turned to ice. Red warning lights flashed through the hallway. Security doors slammed shut. Isabella's breath hitched. They know. Footsteps thundered down the corridors. Voices barked commands over the intercom. Daniel gritted his teeth. They were seconds away from freedom. And now they were trapped. He turned to Isabella, eyes blazing. "Stay here. Protect the babies, Daniel." But he was already running. The confrontation. Daniel sprinted through the hallway, heart racing. Then, just ahead, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Agent Collins. His expression was calm, unreadable. "Going somewhere, Mr. Carter?" Daniel's fists clenched. "You have no right to hold us here." Collins sighed as if this were an inconvenience. "That's where you're wrong. Your children are a national security concern. You don't understand what they are. They're our children." Daniel's voice was low, furious. Collins shook his head. "You're thinking small. This is bigger than you. Bigger than them." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Move." "No." Collins didn't move. "I can't let you do this." Daniel lunged. A fight for freedom. Collins was fast, but Daniel was faster. Years of athletic training kicked in as he dodged a strike, grabbed Collins by the collar, and slammed him against the wall. Collins grunted but retaliated, twisting out of Daniel's grip and landing a sharp punch to his ribs. Daniel staggered but didn't stop. He swung again, this time knocking Collins to the ground. Breathing hard, Daniel looked down at the agent, his body filled with adrenaline and rage. "We're leaving," he growled. Collins, coughing, smirked. "You think it's that easy?" A buzzing sound filled the air. Daniel barely had time to react before something pierced his neck. A tranquilizer. His vision blurred. His knees buckled. Collins stood over him as Daniel collapsed. "We warned you." The last thing Daniel saw before everything went dark. The hallway doors slamming open. Security rushing toward the neonatal unit. Isabella. The babies. And then, nothing. Cliffhanger. The next morning, news stations ran the story. Carter infants taken into protective custody by government officials. Parents of miracle babies arrested during escape attempt. The 20 infants that may change human history. A secret no longer. The world knew now. And Isabella and Daniel were gone. The babies? They belonged to the government now. For the first time, the world truly understood. These children weren't just unique. They were something else entirely. And now, they were in the hands of those who saw them as nothing more than experiments. Darkness. Isabella's head throbbed as she drifted back into consciousness. The cold press of metal against her skin made her shiver. She blinked, trying to focus. The room around her was dimly lit, sterile, and unfamiliar. A single chair sat against the far wall. The air smelled of disinfectant and something metallic, something wrong. Her hands wouldn't move. Panic shot through her. She looked down and saw the restraints. Thick straps bound her wrists to the hospital bed. "Daniel," she whispered, her throat raw. "The babies." A door clicked open. A figure stepped inside. "Agent Collins." "The captivity begins." Collins folded his hands behind his back, watching her like she was a specimen under a microscope. "Where are my children?" Isabella demanded, her voice hoarse. Collins didn't answer right away. He pulled up the chair and sat, completely at ease. "They're safe," he said finally. Isabella's stomach twisted. His version of safe. "Where's Daniel?" Collins sighed. "He's being held in a separate facility. He'll be fine as long as he cooperates." Rage boiled inside her. "You can't do this." Collins tilted his head. "Actually, we can. And we have." She struggled against the restraints, her breath coming in short gasps. "They're just babies. You don't need to keep them." Collins cut her off. "They're not just babies, Mrs. Carter." His voice was calm, but his eyes gleamed with something unsettling. "There's something new. The experiments begin." Miles away, In a classified underground facility, 20 infants lay in a specialized nursery, surrounded by machines, doctors, and researchers. Everything about the room was cold, clinical. No warmth, no lullabies, no parents. Monitors tracked their vitals. Tiny wristbands recorded their genetic markers, oxygen levels, and growth rate. Every movement was logged, every sound analyzed. Dr. Evelyn Marshall, one of the lead geneticists, stared at the data on her screen, her heart pounding. "These numbers aren't normal," she murmured to her assistant. The infants, only weeks old, were now physically comparable to 6-month-old babies. Cognitive tests showed abnormal brain activity beyond what any newborn should be capable of. And then, there was the incident, the display of power. 2 nurses stood by the incubation units, checking vital signs, when baby number 7 suddenly sat up. The nurse gasped, stepping back. "That's not possible. The baby, barely a month old, shouldn't have the strength to do that." But he didn't stop there. The baby turned his head, his 2 aware eyes locking onto the nurse. And then, the lights flickered. The temperature in the room dropped. The machines glitched, sending bursts of static across the monitors. A deep, crackling hum filled the room, as if some unseen force had been unleashed. And then, just as quickly, it stopped. The baby cooed, his tiny fingers curling into a fist. Dr. Marshall's blood ran cold. "What the hell was that?" the nurse whispered. No one had an answer, because nothing about these children was human anymore. Daniel's escape attempt. Meanwhile, Daniel sat in a windowless interrogation room, his wrists cuffed to the table. His head ached from the tranquilizer. The door opened, and 2 guards entered. "On your feet," one of them ordered. Daniel didn't move. The second guard grabbed him by the arm, hauling him up. "We're taking you somewhere new." Orders from above. Daniel saw his opening. He twisted, slamming his elbow into the first guard's ribs. The man staggered back, cursing. The second guard reached for his weapon. Too slow. Daniel lunged, grabbing the gun first. He turned it on them. "Where are my kids?" The first guard, still clutching his side, spat blood onto the floor. "You'll never see them again." Daniel's vision went red. He didn't think. He just moved. With a single, precise strike, he knocked the man unconscious. The second guard tried to grab him, but Daniel was faster, slamming his fist into the man's temple. Both guards collapsed. Daniel grabbed the key card from one of their belts. His hands shook with adrenaline. He was getting out. And he was taking Isabella with him. Cliffhanger. Back at the facility, Dr. Marshall typed frantically on her keyboard, pulling up the security feed from the nursery. She replayed the footage. The baby sitting up. The flickering lights. The machines failing for exactly 4 seconds. Her hands trembled. "They're not just growing faster," she whispered to herself. "They're learning." And that meant only one thing. The Carter's children weren't just evolving. They were becoming something the world wasn't ready for. And now, the government had them. Daniel ran down the dimly lit hallway, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. The key card in his hand felt like his only lifeline, his only shot at breaking free from the nightmare that had swallowed his family whole. He didn't know how much time he had before the guards regained consciousness. But he knew one thing. He had to find Isabella. And then they would get their children back. No matter what it took. The government's plan for the babies. Inside the classified facility, Dr. Marshall sat in a high-security briefing room, surrounded by men in dark suits. Government officials, military leaders, and top scientists, all here for one reason. The Carter infants. Agent Collins stood at the head of the room, his expression unreadable. "We have a situation," he began. Dr. Marshall adjusted her glasses, her stomach twisting. She had spent the past week analyzing the infants' data. The results were beyond anything she had ever seen. "They're accelerating," she said. "Not just in physical growth, but in cognitive development. At this rate, within a year, they could possess the intelligence of a full-grown adult." A murmur spread through the room. One of the officials leaned forward. "Are you saying these children could surpass human capability?" Marshall hesitated. "I'm saying they already have." Agent Collins crossed his arms. "And can they be controlled?" Silence. Then Dr. Marshall said the one thing that made the entire room go still. No. The tension shifted instantly. Collins exhaled sharply. Then we proceed with phase 2. Dr. Marshall's gut twisted. You can't be serious. They're still babies. Collins didn't flinch. They won't be for long. Isabella fights back. Isabella's wrists were raw from struggling against the restraints. Every second that passed felt like a countdown to something worse. She knew they were studying her children. She knew they saw them as objects rather than human lives. And she wasn't going to sit here and do nothing. The door creaked open, and a nurse entered with a tray of food. Eat, the woman said quietly, setting the tray down. Isabella didn't move. She just stared, waiting. The moment the nurse turned to leave, Isabella acted. With every ounce of strength she had, she kicked the metal tray off the table, sending a spray of food and utensils across the floor. The nurse gasped, turning just as Isabella lunged. She wasn't strong enough to fight with brute force, but she didn't need to be. She went for the restraints, grabbing the loose end of the wrist strap with her free hand and pulling hard. It slipped free. The nurse stumbled back, fumbling for the door. Too late. Isabella tackled her to the ground. They struggled, but Isabella's adrenaline was stronger than her exhaustion. She grabbed a fallen fork from the tray and pressed it against the nurse's throat. "Where are my children?" she whispered, voice shaking with rage. The nurse's eyes filled with fear. "Please. I don't know everything, tell me what you do know." The nurse's breath came fast and shallow. They've been moved to another wing. A high-security lab. No one goes in except the doctors and government agents. Isabella's grip tightened. "How do I get to them?" The nurse hesitated, then whispered, "Level B2. The only way down is with a black clearance keycard." Isabella's pulse raced. "Who has one?" The nurse swallowed. "Agent Collins." Daniel and Isabella reunite. Daniel sprinted through the corridor, his stolen keycard granting him access past each locked checkpoint. He didn't stop, didn't slow down. Then, as he rounded the next hallway, he froze. A figure stood at the other end. Isabella. Her wrists were raw, her hospital gown torn, but she was free. Their eyes met, and for a split second, relief flooded through him. Then she ran to him, and he caught her in his arms. "You're okay," he breathed, holding her tightly. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. Daniel pulled back, his expression urgent. "We don't have time. They've moved the babies." Isabella's jaw clenched. "I know where they are." Daniel's heart pounded. "Then let's go get them." The experiment escalates. Deep inside level B2, the Carter infants lay in isolation chambers, hooked up to machines that monitored their every function. Dr. Marshall stood behind a reinforced glass wall, watching the children with a mixture of awe and dread. One of the scientists beside her shook his head. "This is unnatural. We should shut this down before." A warning alarm blared. Dr. Marshall's head snapped toward the monitors. Inside one of the chambers, baby 7 was awake. But he wasn't just awake. He was staring directly at the camera. His tiny hands rested against the glass. And then, the entire room lost power. Screens went black. Machines short-circuited. Dr. Marshall's breath caught in her throat. The baby had done this. As the emergency lights flickered back on, a single, chilling realization hit her. The Carter children weren't just growing. They were waking up. And soon, the world would know what that really meant. Cliffhanger. Daniel and Isabella reached the security doors to level B2. The final checkpoint. The only thing standing between them and their children. Daniel swiped the keycard. The red light blinked. Access denied. Isabella's breath hitched. "No." Then a voice echoed behind them. "Going somewhere?" They turned. Agent Collins stood there, gun drawn. "This ends now." The air was thick with tension. Then, just as Collins took a step forward, the entire facility lost power. The halls plunged into darkness. And from the depths of level B2, a child's voice whispered through the speakers. One word. So chilling. "Mommy." The lights flickered back on. And the door to the infant's chamber unlocked itself. A low hum vibrated through the air, a strange energy pulsing from the depths of level B2. The red access denied light on the security panel flickered. Then, without warning, it turned green. Access granted. The door to the infant's chamber unlocked itself. Daniel and Isabella stared in shock. Agent Collins, still gripping his gun, took a step back, his face twisting in confusion. "What the hell is happening?" he muttered. Then, from the intercom system, the child's voice whispered again. "Mommy!" A supernatural awakening. Inside the observation room, Dr. Marshall's hands trembled over her control panel. All 20 infants had woken up at the same time. Not crying, not fussing, just watching. Watching the cameras. Watching the people behind the glass. Like they knew. Like they understood exactly what was happening. "This isn't right," one of the scientists stammered. They're doing something." Dr. Marshall's eyes locked onto baby 7, the one who had first displayed unusual behavior. He was staring directly at her. His tiny fingers lifted into the air. The lights above shattered. A surge of energy rushed through the room. Every monitor screen glitched, static roaring through the speakers. Then, in perfect synchronization, all 20 infants turned their heads toward the main door. Dr. Marshall's pulse pounded. "They're opening it." The breakup. The heavy steel doors of level B2 slid open on their own. A gust of cold air rushed into the hall, sending a deep chill through Daniel's spine. Isabella gasped. Beyond the doorway, in a vast, sterile room, lay 20 bassinets. And in them, 20 children sat up, fully awake. They weren't screaming. They weren't afraid. They were waiting. Waiting for their parents. A shiver ran down Isabella's spine. They did this. Daniel took a slow step forward, overwhelmed by the sight of his children. Healthy. Alive. More aware than any infant should be. Collins, still aiming his gun, barked, "Don't move. Step away from the chamber." Then, without warning, his gun flew out of his hand. It shot across the room and slammed into the far wall. Collins stumbled back, his face draining of color. Daniel and Isabella's breath caught in their throats. One of the babies, baby 7, had lifted his hand, as if he had willed the gun away. Collins stared in horror. "Oh, no, that's not possible." The baby tilted his head, studying him. And then, Collins flew backward. An invisible force slammed into him, sending him crashing into the hallway wall. Daniel and Isabella froze. Their babies weren't just different. They had abilities. And they were protecting themselves. The power surge. Back in the observation room, alarms were blaring. Scientists ran in panic, scrambling to override the system. Dr. Marshall pressed her palm against the reinforced glass, watching in awe and terror. The infants were standing now. Not wobbling. Not struggling. Standing. A week ago, they had been newborns. But they looked months older. "They're accelerating again," one of the researchers gasped. Dr. Marshall barely heard him, because the infants had all turned to face the security cameras. The screens flickered. Then, a single word typed itself across every monitor. "Let us go." The final confrontation. Daniel and Isabella rushed toward their children, lifting the first babies into their arms. The second Isabella touched them, a strange warmth flooded through her veins. Like they were connected. Like they were speaking to her. Her heartbeat slowed. Her body, which had been aching for weeks, felt stronger. Daniel felt it too. "Bella, do you feel that?" She nodded, cradling one of the babies close. "They're healing us." Collins groaned from the floor, staggering to his feet. His expression was no longer one of control. It was fear. "Get the backup team," he barked into his radio. "We're containing this now." Daniel turned, eyes blazing. "Oh, we're leaving." Collins's expression hardened. "You're not going anywhere." Then, the babies moved again. Or rather, they willed something into existence. The entire facility shook. Walls groaned, as if the building itself were rejecting the people inside. Collins barely had time to react before a burst of invisible energy surged through the room. The hallway cracked apart, lights exploded, and suddenly, the power was out. A single emergency light flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Daniel turned to Isabella. "Now's our chance." They ran, holding their children close, They raced through the halls, past fallen guards, past overturned equipment. The facility was coming apart, and their children were the ones who had caused it. Not out of anger, not out of violence, out of instinct. They had chosen to leave, and nothing was going to stop them. Outside the collapsing facility, black government vehicles lined the perimeter. Agents swarmed the area, radios buzzing with frantic orders. Then, the main doors burst open. Daniel and Isabella emerged, holding their children. Behind them, the entire structure shuddered. The government agents raised their weapons. And then, a shockwave rippled through the air. It wasn't from an explosion. It wasn't from any human force. It came from the infants. One final push of energy. And then, silence. The wind blew softly. The sky remained dark. But something had changed. The government agents lowered their weapons. Their eyes were vacant, empty, as if they had forgotten what they were doing. Daniel and Isabella didn't hesitate. They ran. Past the dazed agents. Past the waiting cars. Into the night. As if the entire world had just let them go. And for the first time since their children had been born, they were free. For now. Daniel drove through the darkened roads, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Isabella sat in the back seat, holding as many of the babies as she could, while the rest lay nestled in the modified transport bassinets beside her. The engine roared through the silence, the highway stretching endlessly before them. The facility was behind them now, reduced to a pile of collapsed steel and shattered government control. But they weren't safe. Not yet. Not with the entire world watching. Not with whatever had just happened. Isabella's heart pounded as she looked at her children, their small faces glowing softly in the dim light. They had done something. Something impossible. And now, the world would never be the same. The new reality. An hour passed before Daniel finally pulled the car onto a desolate side road, deep in the woods. He killed the headlights, exhaling sharply. They needed to regroup, to figure out their next move. Isabella gently placed one of the babies down, brushing a hand across its tiny forehead. "They saved us," she whispered. Daniel turned in his seat, meeting her gaze. "They did more than that." His voice was edged with awe and fear. "They erased the agent's memories." Isabella's breath hitched. "Are you sure?" Daniel swallowed hard. "1 minute they were aiming guns at us. The next, they just let us go." A heavy silence settled between them. Their children weren't just growing at an accelerated rate. They weren't just evolving. They had abilities, powers that defied everything science understood. And if the government had any idea what they were truly capable of, they would never stop hunting them. A world in shock. Meanwhile, across the globe, the news had broken. The mysterious government facility had collapsed overnight. No explanation. No survivors. 20 newborns had vanished without a trace. And the Carter family? Missing. The media exploded. Miracle infants escape government custody? Are they more than human? What really happened at level B2? The Carter family is out there, and the world wants answers. Some called them a medical marvel. Others called them a danger. Everyone wanted to find them, laying low. Daniel and Isabella knew they had only days, maybe hours before the search began in full force. They needed to disappear. Using what little cash they had, they ditched the car, moving on foot through the woods. They avoided security cameras, used back roads, and stayed hidden in motels where no one asked questions. It wasn't sustainable, but it was all they had. And then, the babies changed again. The next evolution. It happened in the middle of the night. Isabella woke to a strange humming sound filling the small motel room. A soft, pulsing energy. She turned over, heart pounding. The babies were awake. All of them. Their eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. Daniel jolted upright. "What's happening?" Isabella barely had time to respond before she felt it. Something shifting. She gasped as visions flashed through her mind. Places, people, memories that weren't hers. Daniel gripped his head, groaning. "Bella, I see things. I feel things." Then he realized it wasn't coming from them. It was coming from the babies. They weren't just growing. They were communicating. Somehow, they were sharing thoughts, emotions, knowledge, directly into their parents' minds. A deep understanding washed over Isabella. They weren't just different. They were something new. The world's first step into something beyond human. And she and Daniel had been chosen to protect them, no matter the cost. The road ahead. The sun rose over the quiet countryside as Isabella held one of her children against her chest, pressing a gentle kiss to its forehead. Daniel sat beside her, exhaustion and determination written across his face. "We can't run forever," he murmured. She nodded. "We won't have to." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" She glanced down at the infants, their tiny fingers twitching as if reaching out for something unseen. "They're leading us somewhere," she said softly. Daniel stilled. "What?" Isabella met his eyes, her voice steady. "They know where we need to go." Daniel inhaled deeply, running a hand through his hair. It didn't make sense. None of this did. But he had trusted them before. And he would do it again. Without another word, they gathered their children, packed their bags, and stepped onto the road. Wherever it led, whatever came next, they would face it together. Final scene, a new beginning. Thousands of miles away, deep in an undisclosed government facility, Agent Collins stood before a room full of officials, his jaw clenched. "They're still out there," one of them said. "We need to find them." Collins' gaze darkened. "We will." He turned toward the large monitor at the front of the room. Surveillance footage played on the screen, a grainy clip of the Carter family leaving the motel. Collins stared at the 20 infants in the video. They were the key to something bigger, something that could change the course of human history. He knew what they were now. And he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not even close.